Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1100 for March 16th, 2025. Coming up in a few minutes.
Lou Foreman had two kids, Michael and Peter, and put the names together and got Michter instead of Michael and Peter. A lot of people think it's a German name. It's not.
Joe Magliocco is the president and founder of Michter's, though he doesn't claim the title of founder. After all, the Michter's legacy goes all the way back to 1753 in the old Shanks distillery in Pennsylvania. But it was Magliocco who bought the trademark rights for Michter's after they had lapsed and revived the brand. Today it's one of the most admired brands in whiskey, having won that title in Drinks International's annual poll the last 2 years running. I'll talk with Joe Magliocco later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
The second release in Dewar's four-part collector series, Dewar's Double Double 38-Year-Old, is now available. It's a tribute to the Scottish Highlands, and it's like nothing you've had before. More in a minute.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Once again, tariffs dominated the week's news. The European Union slapped a 50% tariff on American whiskeys and other specific products starting April 1st to retaliate for U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. The European tariff had been scheduled to take effect anyway after being put on hold in 2021. And Trump responded with a post on his Truth Social platform, threatening a 200% tariff on European spirits and wine unless the EU backs down on its whiskey tariff. Pauline Bastidon of Spirits Europe is hoping calmer heads prevail.
Once again, we're dragged into an entirely unrelated dispute on steel and aluminium. And our message to politicians is very clear. This cycle of tit-for-tat retaliation must end now.
What have you heard from Brussels in your discussions with the EU officials? What have you heard from them regarding the tariffs?
Well, not much so far, to be honest. And everything has happened quite quickly. So we're hoping that they will do the right thing, which is to continue to try to approach the U.S. to negotiate, and that the U.S. will be also inclined to negotiate with them. So that, we can find a way out of this, because we simply cannot live like that with a constant threat on our heads. This is just, it would be immensely painful if the tariffs were enacted, and we just want to avoid that. We need to avoid that because the consequences would be dire for all the companies involved on both sides. We have EU producers that produce U.S. whiskey. We have U.S. companies that produce EU spirits. We cannot continue with these threats, and we certainly cannot face tariffs as high as 50% or 200%.
As a reminder, tariffs are paid by the company that imports goods from another country, not by the country of origin. A 200% tariff would decimate the Irish whiskey industry. The U.S. is the largest export market for Irish whiskey, and Jameson's owner, Pernod Ricard, saw its shares fall 4% in European trading following the threat. The U.K. is not facing that tariff threat on Scotch whiskey. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's government chose not to retaliate for the U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs, hoping instead to negotiate a free trade deal with the U.S. What does the European Union tariff on American whiskeys mean for the U.S. whiskey industry? Well, the 27-nation bloc is the largest overall export market for American whiskeys, and when the original 25% tariff was in place between 2018 and 2021, exports fell by 20%. Craft producers were the hardest hit, with many losing exports to Europe completely, and the American Craft Spirits Association calls the current events unfair and unjust. In other news, Lofted Spirits announced plans to lay off 27 workers at its Green River distillery in Owensboro, Kentucky this week. The company said in an email that a number of its contract distilling customers are struggling, and the decision was made to adjust production now with the long-term health of the business in mind. Green River will go to a single production shift. Diageo has announced plans to stop investing in smaller liquor brands through Distill Ventures, its London-based incubation partner. Distill Ventures has essentially operated as Diageo's venture capital firm to seek out and develop emerging brands. Among the investments Distill will continue to manage are minority stakes in Australia's Starward Distillery and Denmark's Stauning Whiskey. Highland Park Distillery has reopened following a shutdown that lasted nearly a year to upgrade systems at the 227-year-old distillery. The upgrades include a new heat recovery system that's expected to reduce CO2 emissions by 20%, along with replacing the 12 wooden washbacks with stainless steel tanks as part of a £13 million mash house upgrade. Finally, the modernization includes wheelchair accessibility for visitors, and the distillery is reopening to tourists with 6 new tours. The American Craft Spirits Association handed out its 11th annual Craft Spirits Awards this week at the ACSA's convention in Tucson, Arizona. Missouri's Still 630 distillery won Best of Class in Whiskies for its Still Second Shift whiskey, and Catoctin Creek's Becky Harris was presented with the Gable Lorenzo Spirit of Community Award. I was a judge in this competition, and you can get a behind-the-scenes look at the judging in episode 1079 of WhiskyCast from last October. New whiskeys to mention this week. Livingstone and Elixir Distillers have released the second annual batch of single malts in their Macbeth series. Each whiskey represents a character in Shakespeare's classic The Tragedy of Macbeth, with label illustrations by Sir Quentin Blake and notes by Dave Broom. The 8 whiskeys in the batch range from a 12-year-old Ben Rinnes to a 45-year-old Bunnahabhain. Yellowstone Bourbon is out with a new small batch 107 expression, bottled at 53.5% ABV. It's a 6-year-old whiskey that goes back to the 1960s when Yellowstone was bottled at 6 years old. It carries a recommended retail price of $44.99 a bottle. Scotland's Wolfburn Distillery has released its first-ever cognac-finished single malt. The whiskey was originally matured in first-fill bourbon casks since 2017 and spent its final 6 months in cognac casks from France. It's a limited edition release with just 3,900 bottles available, priced at £69.99 a bottle. Taiwan's Kavalan Distillery is releasing its oldest whiskeys to date to mark the 15th anniversary of the first Kavalan single malt release. The 15th anniversary vintage 2009 Oloroso Sherry Cask Strength and the 15th anniversary vintage 2009 Ex-Bourbon Cask Strength single malts are priced at $1,000 each in the U.S. Virginia Distillery Company is expanding its Brewers Coalition range with a new American single malt, finished in proper pour stout casks from Kansas City's Boulevard Brewing. The beer is aged in ex-bourbon barrels for 20 months and finished for 5 months in French oak Cabernet casks. It'll be available in limited quantities through the distillery's website and select retailers. And 15 Stars Bourbon is releasing a 3 ports expression. It takes 9 and 15-year-old Kentucky bourbons and finishes them in a combination of tawny, white, and ruby port barrels. Look for it at a recommended retail price of $179.99 a bottle. And finally, the next time you're at the beach, pay attention. Men's Journal recently reported that Austin Contagiacomo was walking along the shore near Atlantic City, New Jersey, throwing a ball for his sheepadoodle Coda when the dog spotted something in the sand. It turned out to be 11 bottles of Prohibition-era whiskey.
He was the one that really did all the heavy lifting. I guess he picked up on its scent and kind of hooked to the left and was more interested in the bottles than he was the ball. So I ended up kind of walking up to him and seeing what he was investigating, and he was like, I guess like what dogs do is when things smell funky, they'd like to rub on it. So he was rubbing on the bottles, and I was trying to see what he was doing and what he was paying attention to. And at first I didn't really know what it was, and then I started seeing, as I looked around the area, I started seeing more and more of them, all pretty close to each other, within about like maybe 50 yards of each other, but some of them were as close as, like 3 feet. So, I was on the phone with somebody and bent over to get a good look at what it was. And I don't drink, but the friend that I was talking to, an old college buddy, I asked him if he had known what Lincoln Inn was, and he said no, but he did a Google search, and he was like, man, I think that stuff is pretty old. So I kind of just took my jacket off. It was pretty cold that day and windy, but I took my jacket off and I started throwing the bottles in the jacket while it was laid on the ground, and then figured at the time that I was at least just cleaning up the beach, like getting rid of the bottles and maybe stopping kids from drinking it. I didn't know how old he had really meant, but so I ended up taking 11 home.
Lincoln Inn whiskey dates back to the Prohibition era, and Canadian whiskey expert Davin de Kergamo says it was probably distilled at the old LaSalle distillery in Montreal and carried by smugglers along the Atlantic coast.
It was really common, very, very common. When they were shipping whiskey from Canada down to the United States along the eastern seaboard, they went all the way down to Florida and, right up to New York and even above that. They would throw, like a gunny sack full of bottles overboard if the Coast Guard was coming or something like that. And it really doesn't surprise me that people are still finding these. And obviously the ones that are cloudy they have seawater in them. But I would bet that the ones that are clear are probably still good whiskey. I'd love to taste one of those.
Giacomo suspects some recent dredging along the shore uncovered the bottles. He gave most of them to his Coast Guard buddies, one to his father, and kept one bottle for himself, though he'll never open it. Giacomo doesn't drink. More on the history of Lincoln Inn later in our Behind the Label segment. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. Whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. The Cork Whiskey Fest takes place this coming weekend in Cork, Ireland. The Dornoch Castle Hotel in Dornoch, Scotland hosts a Glenallachie tasting this Saturday. The Brandy Library in New York City has an exceptional Scotch spirit school on Tuesday the 25th. Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville, Kentucky has its 20th anniversary party on the 27th. And Whiskey Live London is March 28th and 29th. Finally, the Newcastle Whiskey Festival in Newcastle, England, and Big Smoke Meets Whiskey Fest in Tampa, Florida, are both on March 29th. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Dewar's Double Double 38-year-old is the second release in a 4-part limited edition collector series honoring Scotland's most legendary whiskey regions. This rare blended malt, a tribute to the Upper Scottish Highlands, is crafted from nearly 4-decade-old Highland and Islay whiskies. It undergoes Dewar's unique 4-stage aging process with a final finish in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks from the prestigious Royal Brackla single malt. The finish invites you to explore your own tasting notes, but for me, there's incredible depth, with rich layers of vanilla, toasted cereals, dried figs, plums, dark chocolate, and a subtle hint of Islay smoke, all beautifully balanced. To truly elevate this tasting experience, renowned chef Gabriel Cruther, in collaboration with Dewar's, has created an exclusive selection of custom chocolates. Crafted from the world's finest ingredients, each piece is infused with a few precious drops of Dewar's Double Double 38-year-old whiskey, making this a luxurious and unforgettable pairing. Now available, this exquisite pairing of whiskey and chocolate promises to deliver an unforgettable experience. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024. Dewar's is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch whiskey, 48.8% alcohol by volume.
This week on WhiskyCast In-Depth, I'm joined by Michter's president, Joe Magliocco. Whiskey Magazine France asked me to interview Joe for a profile that will run in the April edition in French. Our English language conversation covered everything from the history of Michter's and how Joe acquired the trademark rights for the name in the 1990s to today's pressing issues of tariffs and overproduction. And I should note that this interview was conducted before the latest round of tariffs and the Canadian boycott affecting the bourbon industry. First of all, let's go through the history of Michter's. How did you start the brand originally when you found the trademarks for the original Michter's?
It's a great question. Obviously, Michter's has a long legacy. It goes back to the Pennsylvania distillery that was founded by John Schenck in 1753. Lots of history. The Pennsylvania distillery in Schaefferstown changed its name in the 1800s when it was bought by a guy named Bomberger, and became Bomberger's in the 1800s. It wasn't until the 1950s that it became known as Michter's. And Lou Foreman had who was sort of running it then, and was sort of, I believe, principal owner. Lou Foreman had two kids, Michael and Peter, and put the names together and got Michter's out of Michael and Peter. A lot of people think it's a German name. It's not. The Pennsylvania distillery, made some really nice whiskey. Sour mash was its lead item, from what I understand. And in 1989, the Pennsylvania company, went bankrupt. Pretty much, the American whiskey business, as you well know, you know so much about this business. The whiskey industry in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even into the early 2000s, was really quite bad, and almost in a virtual depression. And Pennsylvania Michter's failed. I was familiar with Pennsylvania Michter's in the history because they actually sold Michter's as a summer job during college. One year, and then when I was tasked with starting a wine and spirit supplier company, Chatham Imports, that's the parent of Michter's distillery right nowadays, and it's 1990s, just wanted to do a whiskey, and we did due diligence on the Michter's name, and basically, it was, the trademark was available at the time for anybody that wanted to go to the Patent and Trademark Office and acquire it for $245. So we spent the $245 and we became the owner of the Michter's trademark. We had no whiskey, no formulas, no packaging, nothing. Basically, started working in the 90s to bring the brand back. It was a historic brand, and it just seemed like a shame to let it disappear. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to put any time or money into it in those days. But our group thought that it had potential, and we set to work. One of the first big decisions was, Pennsylvania is such a great state, and there's so much history there. One of the first big decisions is, do you try to restart in Pennsylvania, or do you restart in Kentucky? And I was being mentored by really one of my wonderful man who was really one of my mentors in the industry, Dick Newman, and Dick was advising me. Dick had previously run Old Taylor, Old Crow, and Old Grandad for National Distillers, and later became president of Austin Nichols Wild Turkey. And so he knew Kentucky really well. He knew whiskey really well. And he said to me, Joe, I know you're agonizing over, do you restart in Pennsylvania or restart in Kentucky? But in terms of whiskey resources, you're going to have whiskey resources in Kentucky that, you're just not going to have in any other state. And that for American whiskey, Kentucky is the place if you want to someday try to be one of the best and play with the best. You got to play with the best. And so we restarted in Kentucky. We went through 3 phases of production. First phase of production, we had absolutely nothing to do with making the whiskey. First phase of production, we went around Kentucky the 1990s, went around Kentucky tasting stuff. And Kentucky was awash with great whiskey. I mean, everybody was over inventoried. Um, when people heard that we were looking for, 10-year plus stuff, they were thrilled because there wasn't much of a market for age statement stuff at that point for American whiskey. When they heard that we wanted especially to focus on rye, American rye, they were absolutely ecstatic because, rye was not selling then. We went to a bunch of different distilleries. Dick obviously had great relationships in Kentucky. He was a wonderful man. And the Kentucky industry, was and still continues to be, pretty collegial. We went around and it was Dick, me, and Steve Ziegler, who still, 30 years later is running sales for us. Steve Ziegler, like me, we're not formally trained whiskey people. I don't have the science and the chemistry and all that stuff, but we love whiskey. So Steve and Dick and I tasted around and we picked a style of whiskey that we personally liked. There's a lot of great stuff out there. There's so much good stuff out there and so many different styles, but we picked a style that we liked ourselves. And, that hopefully if we ever were lucky enough, would make someday ourselves. That was phase one, but we had nothing to do with making it. The stuff had already been made. Phase two, in 2003, we went to a Kentucky distiller operating under capacity. I am not allowed to say who it is because we have a confidentiality agreement with them. But I went to, everybody was under capacity in those days. Went to Kentucky distillery operating under capacity. And we decided that we worked with them and made a plan that a certain number of days per year were Michter's days. Our yeast, our mash bills, our barrel specs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We would actually go there. We were technically a non-distiller producer in phase two, but I think it was a little bit more than that. I say that we were a little bit more almost like, a chef that can't afford his own restaurant yet cooking in somebody else's kitchen. Phase three, in 2012, we became, we finally had the financial resources. Distilleries are expensive. If you want to do it right and, make sure you have the right safety equipment, all that stuff, distilleries are quite expensive. We didn't have the financial resources until then. And by 2012, we did have the financial resources and we became a licensed distiller at Michter Shively. We did not, distill a lot ourselves then. We had 2 small stills. We did our bottling there. We did our processing there. And then what is our main still system still today, went in 2014. And it wasn't for, many months, until the phase 3 stuff, the stuff we were making ourselves at Shively, until it was, chemistry wise, on the gas chromatograph, mass spectrometer, until the chemistry tests were really tight with the phase 2 distillate, and until organoleptically it tasted like it. It took us months to get to where the phase 3 stuff was super tight in terms of quality and taste and style to the phase 2, because we didn't want to come out with something different. And then we finally started to barrel the whiskey ourselves in 2015. So from that point on, we became totally self-sufficient in terms of our distillation. In the meantime, right now in Kentucky, we have 3 facilities. Michter Shively, we have a 12-acre campus at Michter Shively. That is our main operation. We have a 46-foot high, 32-inch diameter column still, and a 250-gallon pot still doubler. All copper, all custom made by Vendome. We have 11,000 pounds of copper in the system. That's our main operation. So again, Michter Shively is traditional sort of Kentucky, column, then pot still distillation for bourbon and American rye. At Fort Nelson, which is our second distillery, we have a smaller distillery that's open to the public in downtown Louisville. It's opposite the Louisville Slugger Bat Factory. It's in a beautiful old building. The beautiful old building took us 8 years to restore. We joked that we were the first ones to announce a downtown distillery in decades, and we were the last ones to open. Because it took us 8 years. The building was it was a very historic building. We had to deal with all sorts of landmark stuff. The building was really in much worse shape than we anticipated. And it literally took us 8 years to finish the renovation, but we're very happy with it. And we opened.
You actually had a wall collapse, if I remember right.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, fortunately, yeah. I mean, it was. We had, we were, as I said, the first ones to announce in modern times to announce a downtown distillery in Louisville. And it was, we had this whole big announcement. We're under contract for the building, and everybody's all happy. And then 2 weeks later, I got a terrifying email from our structural engineer who had, pointed lasers at the West 8th Street wall. And he said that the email said that there was, I'm quoting, imminent danger of catastrophic failure, which is not a great email to get. So the brick on the West 8th Street wall at the top of the building was bowed 23 inches out of place. It was literally like you squeezed a cereal box and the top bowed out. What happened was that, one of the previous owners, the building had been vacant for many decades. One of the previous owners, when the roof leaked and the floors rotted, decided rather than fixing the roof and the floors, he would just rip out the floors. But that, hurt the structural integrity of the building. And I think it was 2009, before we bought the building, some economic development people from the city were being given a tour by the previous owner, and the stairs collapsed. And some people were very seriously injured. And so the building had a lot of challenges, but even more than we expected. Nowadays, we had to put in, basically, to make it safe and steady and sturdy. We had to put in a 400,000-pound steel system in this building. But right now, have you seen it, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right now, we're very, it's quite popular. Fortunately, the building, our architects, Cash Motor, did a brilliant job, and our team, has done a lot of work on it. It's a it's a very, very cool building. We give educational tours there. We do tastings there. We have a gift shop. And we have literally a world-class cocktail bar upstairs. And the cocktail bar upstairs, we have some delicious drinks, and the classic drinks are actually curated by Dave Wondrich, Dr. Dave, who is just terrific.
And then your third facility is your warehousing complex, right?
Well, a third facility, we have a 205-acre. We have some warehouses here, but it's primarily a 205-acre farm in Springfield, Kentucky. It's about an hour and 15 minutes from Louisville, and we're growing some of our own estate-grown grains there. And what's also interesting about Michter's Fort Nelson, our second smaller distillery, we were fortunate to be able to buy the pot-to-pot still system from Michter's, Pennsylvania. And we have been distilling on it, and we have been barreling on it, barreling whiskey from that legendary Pennsylvania system since 2019 was when we started to barrel the whiskey there. And we've not released any of the Fort Nelson whiskey yet, but eventually we will. And it's interesting because you're such an expert, but as you well know, you could have the same mash bill, you could have the same yeast, same water, same grain, same everything. When you do column to pot, which is sort of traditional Kentucky, you can get a very different result than a pot to pot system, which is what the Michter's Pennsylvania system was. And so we're going to have some really, really, interesting whiskeys that are these Fort Nelson releases eventually, hopefully.
When do you think you might release some?
Uh, the answer is I don't know. We taste them, and we were very happy with how they're coming so far. We really, our Michter's Kentucky team, we've had the philosophy since basically we restarted. We don't release to a specific age statement. We actually release when our master distiller and our master of maturation feel it's ready. Our master distiller is Dan McKee nowadays, Andrea Wilson, a Bourbon Hall of Famer. She's our master of maturation. They really make the ultimate decision. I weigh in, and like I said, I know a little bit, and I like to taste, and I love whiskey. So I'll weigh in with my opinion, but ultimately, they have to say. I mean, for example, we always say whether we're doing it or not, the goal is to produce the greatest American whiskey. That's what we're trying to do as a team, whether we're doing it or we're not doing it, but that's the goal, to produce the greatest American whiskey. And, and being privately held, we kind of have the advantage that, sorry about that, guys. We kind of have the advantage of our ownership has basically said to me and Dan and Andrea and the team, if there's anything to do to make the whiskey better, don't worry about your cost of goods sold. And so, we get to run it a little bit differently than we would perhaps if we were a public company. For example, 2022, I think it was, we released no 10-year bourbon, which is a really, important item for us. And, I get to do the tastings with the team. And Steve Ziegler, as I said, Steve, who loves whiskey like I do, Steve and I tasted the whiskey. It was 13 and a half years old at the time. You can put older stuff than the age statement in the bottle. You can't obviously you can put younger stuff in. That's fraudulent. You get in bad trouble. But you can put older stuff in. And the whiskey that was being considered for the 10-year release for 2022 was actually 13 and a half years old. I thought it was great. Steve thought it was great. Dan and Andrea, as I said, are the ultimate gatekeepers nowadays. And they said, it is really good, but if you let us hold it one more year, it's going to be really, really memorable. So we sold no 10-year bourbon that year. They waited until it was 14 and a half years old, and it came out, and fortunately, the reception was very good.
Tell me how you found Willie Pratt.
Willie was our first Kentucky master distiller, and Willie was decades at Brown-Forman. Willie never had the title of master distiller. He was actually really, really great friends with Lincoln Henderson. The only time Willie was like a man's man. The only time I ever saw Willie cry was when Lincoln passed away. I never saw him cry other than that. And I'd known Willie for years. Kentucky is a small community. I have friends at other distilleries, including Brown-Forman. And, when I learned about Willie and, when Willie retired from Brown-Forman, I said, Willie, you want to do a little work with us and et cetera. And it wound up being sort of, the little work wound up being sort of more than full time. But Willie loved it. And Willie was really remarkable. I really admire him. In his 70s, he was still doing all sorts of experimentation. I mean, he did all sorts of experimentation. He was really, in my opinion, an amazing expert on maturation. He and Lincoln Henderson actually co-led. My understanding is they co-led. They were co-heads of Brown-Forman's production committee for years. Again, Willie didn't have the title of master distiller, but Willie knew a ton at Brown-Forman, and his reputation was great. He was a wonderful man, And he did a terrific job for us. He did the first celebration. I was looking at a Wally's catalog in 2011, Christmas catalog from Wally's, a wonderful store in Southern California. And I saw all these beautiful, cognacs for thousands of dollars a bottle, and all these beautiful scotches for $1,000 a bottle. And I said, Willie, could you do, just an amazing blend, that's really special? And he said, sure, I can. And that's how Michter's Celebration came about. We didn't release it until 2013. But he was just. He was a real character. And just the great thing about him. I assume you probably have interviewed him. I know you knew him, and you probably interviewed him at certain points. The great thing about Willie is you never knew what the hell he was going to say. And I was doing a joint interview with him once, and the writer asked what I thought was a really good question. He said, when I speak to a master distiller, I like to ask him, when's the first time they ever tasted their type of whiskey? And he says, Willie, do you remember? And Willie says, yeah, I remember. I was about 18 years old, and my ex-father-in-law gave me some bourbon with my Coca-Cola, and the guy said, well, how'd you like it? The reporter said, how'd you like it? Willie said, I told my father-in-law, you ruined my Coke. But he was just. He was, seemed like a real sort of country guy. He was from Eastern Kentucky, but in my opinion, just absolutely brilliant and a really good man.
How are you managing the popularity of Michter's internationally?
We're very fortunate in that Michter's has traveled well. At this point, our international business is very important to us. Drinks International out of London conducts a poll of whiskey experts from over 20 different countries, journalists, educators, on-premise people, off-premise people from over 20 different countries. And, 2023, late 2023, it came out that for the first time ever, an American whiskey company was the world's most admired. It was Michter's. We figured, hey, let's put it on our hang tags, and let's really, market it hard, and et cetera. And then late 2024, we were thrilled and surprised because for the first time ever, a whiskey company repeated as the world's most admired. And again, it's an over 20 country poll. It was Michter's. First time ever that any country's whiskey had ever repeated. So we're very, very grateful for the reception that we've had and all the help that we've had abroad. At this point, we're selling Michter's to over 80 foreign jurisdictions. France is actually a really great market for us. We had a very strong sales year in France. We have a tremendous, excellent importer there, La Maison de Whiskey. They're just a fabulous company, and they've been a tremendous partner for us. And our sales in calendar 24 were super strong. When you talk about France in particular, the French consumer we found is really knowledgeable, and they're really focused on quality. And I think that they seem to be receptive to quality American whiskey. It's interesting. Like I said, we're selling to over 80 export markets at this point, and we do whiskey shows all over the world. As good as any, and one of the very, very, just best in the world is Whiskey Live Paris. It's a really, really outstanding show. So that's France in particular. But we're very grateful for the business we get there, and very grateful for working with, grateful for the reception from the French people, grateful for the work that La Maison de Whiskey's done. But our international business is actually quite important to us.
How worried are you about the threat of tariffs coming back?
I'm concerned. Look, countries have tariffs. I mean, and there are reasons that countries put tariffs on. Um, there's a lot of publicity that India lowered their tariffs, and I think that's wonderful that they lowered their tariffs. Their tariffs is still like 100%. I mean, still super high. So, it's not just the US, instituting tariffs. There's a lot of tariffs that we deal with around the world. Um, there are reasons they do it, obviously, from the viewpoint of somebody trying to sell whiskey abroad, and export, American whiskey from the viewpoint, from the singular viewpoint of somebody, who, we own half of at Chatham, the parent of Michter's, we own half of really, arguably the high-end mezcal around the world now, Los Siete Misterios, that we import from Mexico. Obviously, we import stuff, we export stuff. From that particular viewpoint, you want to see, tariffs be as low as possible. Because I think that they will somewhat affect volume, and I think that they will somewhat affect margins. It's interesting in that, a lot of work was done previously when there were some tariff increases, by the companies in the industry to try to help absorb some of the tariffs, and not pass them all along. But we'll see what happens. But that's look, we have to do the best that we can, and it's for our governments to decide what's best for the governments.
How worried are you about the economy?
You're starting to get into stuff way over my pay grade. I if I knew a lot about economics, and if I knew a lot about finance, I wouldn't be trying to sell booze for a living. The I'm a little bit concerned. Obviously, I'm always concerned. But I don't think that the economy is necessarily in a bad place at this point. But again, that I am really not. I don't consider myself really qualified to. I think I know a reasonable amount about liquors and wine and trying to sell it because that's what I do. But I certainly don't consider myself an expert on the economy. But people are worried about inflation, in the U.S. But a lot of countries be thrilled to have 3% inflation. We'll see. But the answer is I don't know.
What are the main challenges you face in the international market today?
I'm sorry, in which particular market?
In the international markets.
I think that it's. I think that one of the biggest challenges is just education, and look, bourbon, as you know better than anybody because you're such an expert, and so damn much. The bourbon is America's official, spirit. 1964 it was declared America's native spirit by Congress. And really, I think for many, many years, anecdotally, what I've seen is for many, many years, American companies, were blessed with such a big market in the U.S. that they were really primarily focused on selling bourbon and establishing bourbon and American rye in the U.S. I don't think that the American distillers, from the little bit that I know and from what I've heard from some of my older friends and some of my mentors, some of whom have passed at this point, I don't think that there was the type of focus on exporting that maybe a country like Scotland had, or a country like France, a country like Scotland had, a country like France had. France has been doing a brilliant job of exporting cognac for a long time. Scotland has been doing a brilliant job of exporting Scotch for a long time. I don't that in general, and I'm sure that there are great exceptions, and you got a lot of great companies in the U.S. Spirit business, but I think that there wasn't the same emphasis on exporting from American companies. I don't think the emphasis was as strong, 40 years ago, as it was maybe for countries like France and Scotland. And so I think there's a bit of catching up to do. And I think that there's also, I think a really big thing is just sort of educating people that, good quality American whiskey is really one of the great international spirits. And that, you can have, a bourbon, you can have, or an American rye that, or some special blend that rivals some of the greatest stuff from anywhere. And I think that there's a growing awareness of American, quality. I think that the industry, especially the Kentucky producers, have been doing a really good job over the past, 20, 30 years or so, playing catch up. But I think there still is a little bit of catch up. And I think again, it still is, American whiskey, and quality American whiskey is still a bit of a discovery thing for a lot of people around the world. And so I think that the education is really important. I think that's one of the big challenges is just look, people around the world, they know that there are these beautiful high quality cognacs. They know that there's beautiful high quality scotches. I think now there's sort of growing awareness, beautiful high quality Japanese whiskeys, fantastic Japanese whiskeys. But I think now that there's a growing awareness that American whiskeys can be, really just very special too. But I don't think that it has a level of awareness internationally that we're eventually going to get. And I think that is one of the biggest. I think that is probably the single biggest challenge at this point.
You and your colleagues in Kentucky are laying down an awful lot of whiskey these days.
Yes.
Are you worried about overproduction?
That is a great question. We always say, like, we have to sort of worry about Michters, and we focus on our own business, and and we do a lot of planning and give a lot of thought into what we're laying down for ourselves. Now, when you talk about and we're very comfortable with where we are. When you talk about the industry, and fortunately, even though the industry's had a tougher time, we had nice growth last year at Michter's. The industry has gone through a tougher time, and as you well know, there's been tremendous capacity expansion in Kentucky, and you also have had some financial firms sort of enter the business from a financial point of view, like, literally just investing, laying down barrels. They don't have a brand, but they lay down barrels and on the hopes that they're going to sell them for a big profit later on. And their returns, apparently, from what I understand, the returns were quite good for a period of years. But I think that there is just tremendous new capacity in Kentucky, and question whether I'm very bullish long term about Kentucky bourbon, because I think there's just so much opportunity to grow in the U.S. I think there's an unbelievable opportunity to grow abroad. I'm very bullish about American rye long term. But that being said, is there an overcapacity right now? And I think there might be. We'll see. I'm old enough to know things don't always go up. One of my first jobs, I was working for a distributor in Connecticut, and my boss was Charlie Wells. Charlie had been president of Four Roses. And, this is the 1980s. I'm a young man then. And, we're driving down I-95, the big highway in the Northeast. Driving down I-95 in the daytime, there's a funeral procession coming the other way with lights, cars with the lights on. And Charlie says to me, Joey, there goes another one of our bourbon drinkers. And the whiskey business was just terrible in those days. Everybody was having double-digit losses and stuff, and there was just a glut of whiskey. And again, I don't think we're gonna go back to that. But is there overcapacity right now? I think there may be more capacity than short term is needed. It's my opinion. But again, my job is to worry about Michter's, and I think we're in good shape.
Thanks to Joe Magliocco of Michter's for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. And you'll find a link to the Michter's website in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. One of the latest releases from Michter's is the Bomberger's PFG, or Precision Fine Grain. It's a bourbon finished in custom toasted and charred French oak barrels, made from staves seasoned for 40 months along the Charente River in France. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the Bomberger's PFG. It's bottled at 50.1% ABV, and the nose has touches of toasted oak, red apples, subtle spices, and fresh berries. The taste has notes of raspberry jam, cinnamon and clove spices, red apples, caramel, vanilla, and chocolate. The finish is long with wood spices, raspberry jam, and chocolate. And I'm scoring the Bomberger's PFG Bourbon a 94. Next up, the 2025 release of Hedonism Blended Grain Scotch Whiskey from Compass Box. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has touches of garden herbs, honey, vanilla, and a hint of citrus. The taste is thick, chewy, and tart with white pepper, cinnamon, honey, citrus, and a hint of rosemary. The finish is long and spicy with a subtle tartness, and I'm scoring the Compass Box Hedonism 2025 edition a 93. Finally, I had to taste at least one Irish whiskey this week with St. Patrick's Day coming up. 2 stacks. The first cut is bottled at 43% ABV, and the nose has touches of lemon zest, ginger, honey, and a slight kiss of smoke. The taste is creamy and tart with lemon pepper spice, ginger root, honey, and vanilla. The finish, long and tart. I'm scoring the 2 stacks first cut a 91. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of nearly 3,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com. Let's open up the inbox now and see what people are talking about this week in our community segment. Tariffs remain the number one topic of conversation. Ivo Fanati emailed this from Port Perry, Ontario, in response to our story last week with Brown-Forman CEO Lawson Whiting and his response to the Canadian boycott of American whiskies. Here's what Ivo had to say. I was surprised by the comment of the CEO of Jack Daniel's saying that Canada pulling American liquor off the shelves is not a major event and will have minimal impact on sales as Canada represents only 1% of their sales. This is the tip of the iceberg. People outside Canada will stop drinking American products in solidarity with Canada. Canada has a great reputation worldwide and regularly contributes more than its share. Canada provides energy and resources that are needed for distilling in the USA. Where does the oil come from? Where does the copper get refined? Let's check back in 3 months at the next earnings report and see if sales are up or down, and by how much. My bet is down by 5%. Keep up the good work. Thanks for your comments, Evo. Oki posted this comment in the WhiskyCast community app. This won't be an overnight impact. Tariffs are a long game construct, the impacts of which will be felt by the consumer and the manufacturers alike. Rather unfortunate times to be a whiskey enthusiast. However, luckily we have a plethora of amazing whiskey right here in America, so all told, shouldn't be a problem for most. And Matt responded to that with this. Oki, I understand what you're saying and how tariffs work. However, no longer purchasing spirits for the U.S. is not a tariff, but rather a complete moratorium in most provinces. It certainly will be interesting to see if consumers on both sides of the border step up to support the industries in their respective countries. If you have something you'd like to add to the conversation, download the free WhiskyCast community app and jump right in. You can also reach us on Blue Sky, X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and people who make whiskey unique. During the news, I mentioned Lincoln Inn, the brand of whiskey that Austin Contagiacomo found on the beach near Atlantic City. Lincoln Inn can be traced back to the old LaSalle distillery in Montreal, where it was one of the brands that made up the Distillers Corporation Limited, as Davin DeKergamo explains.
Well, that was Sam Bronfman's it's kind of umbrella company. He wanted to, he really liked the Distillers Company Limited in Scotland. He was just in love with anything Scottish that, with reference to whiskey. And I think he wanted to, he was hoping to merge with them, and that didn't happen. And then I think he formed this company, and he wanted to distribute their products, which I think did happen. And it was kind of his umbrella corporation, and it included Seagram's and then various other of his enterprises. And he wanted the legitimacy of Scotland, and he built his headquarters, and it looked like a castle and everything. So it was a Bronfman company, but he deliberately made it. He gave it a name that was very, very similar to the Distillers Company Limited in the UK. Sam Bronfman was a really interesting guy. Where everybody else was just trying to crank out as much juice as they could during Prohibition, just get alcohol that had any kind of a flavor out there. He really was very interested in getting quality whiskey that tasted like whiskey. And of course, in the beginning, he was just making compounding whiskey, just like everybody else. But he very quickly switched to making very flavorful whiskey. And Louis Rosenstiel wanted to be partners with him, but Sam tasted his whiskey and said it was terrible, and he didn't want anything to do with him. But when Prohibition was over, what was really kind of cool is that because they'd been aging their whiskey for quite a considerable time during Prohibition, as soon as Prohibition was over, they had really flavorful, mature whiskey ready to go on day one, and they were selling that into the States and putting it in all the American whiskey brands bottles, and it was really quite something.
Sam Bronfman is considered one of the most influential figures of the 20th century in whiskey. Davin credits him with developing the Canadian style of blending whiskey, where all of the grains are distilled and matured separately, then blended together. Bronfman also created Crown Royal Canadian whiskey, still the best-selling Canadian whiskey today. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us. Download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store or find us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Dewar's Double Double 38-year-old blended malt has arrived, and it's a true gem for collectors. Secure a bottle, and you'll be adding a rare piece of history to your collection.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2025. And comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.